Hi, welcome to the Connection Podcast. I am Lauren Dry, also known as the Connection Catalyst. Connection and this podcast for me is personal. As a driven professional, I found myself an expert in all things work and business, but it was at home that I really needed clarity and ease. After finally finding that, one marriage breakdown and one marriage reset later, and finally discovering what really works to have connection in modern relationships, using science, simplicity, and soul, our signature program, Rise into Regulation, was born. That's giving so many others in modern driven relationships back clarity and ease for good. On the podcast today, we're going deep together on all things relationships, business, identity, and leadership. Clarity and ease is at the heart of it all, and we're so happy to be with you so that you can have what you need in connection, mind, body, and soul, too. Today, I would like to welcome Valerie Rubin. Valerie is a relationship and anxiety therapist who helps women heal their anxious attachment style so that they can become a match for healthy, secure love. I am so passionate about attachment theory. If you haven't come across it yet, it's going to really shake your world. Attachment theory is a really powerful way to explain how we unconsciously move in relationships. And it comes along with some really groundbreaking new statistics. So there are particular attachment styles which we're going to go in deep together, but one attachment style specifically is called anxious attachment style. And you may not even identify as someone who really is an anxious person. But as we go deep on this podcast, you're going to discover that anxious attachment style might be something that you want to learn more about. And it may really resonate with you around hidden patterns that may be popping up in your relationships. Individuals with anxious attachment style are more likely to experience inflamed health conditions, higher emotional reactivity, and relationship dissatisfaction. Valerie, through nervous system regulation, inner child healing, and somatic therapy, guides her clients out of survival mode and into deep emotional safety within themselves and their relationships. Valerie is also the host of the Anxiety Recovery Podcast, a top 15% Spotify podcast, where she interviews therapists, coaches, and thought leaders about emotional healing, attachment theory, somatic work, and conscious relationships. I am so pleased to introduce you to Valerie. Welcome to the Connection Podcast.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Lauren. I am so excited to be here and dive really deep on anxious attachment.
Me too. This is such a wonderful topic for me. We have covered what attachment styles are, and we've touched on it on the podcast before. But I'm really excited to dive deeper into specifically what anxious attachment style is. Now, we have a whole range of listeners, people who are deeply across what attachment theory is, and also people who may only be hearing about attachment theory for the first time. So I'd love to hear from you a couple of things. We're going to go deep tonight. I'd really love to hear your own personal experiences and why this is so important to you. But I think we should start fresh for maybe people who are hearing the phrase attachment theory for the first time. I'd love to hear from you what you would say attachment theory is and what exactly anxious attachment theory is and how it relates to relationships.
Such great questions here, Lauren. So, with attachment theory, it's ultimately reflects the quality of your early attachment to your caregivers. It ultimately has long term effects on social and emotional development. And so, with an anxious attachment style, how it really develops is in adulthood, it's this constant need for reassurance, a deep fear of abandonment and rejection, difficulty trusting others and themselves, feeling clingy. I don't even like the word clingy, but that's how a lot of my clients describe their experience. A lot of clients of mine struggle with codependency. Codependency, in simple terms, I define it as if my partner's having a bad day, I'm having a bad day. My sense of safety, I do not have the skills to cultivate that from within. So now it is needed for someone else to help me feel safe. And then difficulty with boundaries, overthinking, chronic anxiety and worrying in the relationship, low self esteem. A lot of my clients who are anxiously attached also are very hyper vigilant. As soon as their partner walks in the room, they already can sense if their energy is off, if their partner is anxious, what their partner is feeling. They may struggle with being vulnerable. So those are some really common traits with anxious attachment and really how that manifests.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would love to hear from you. So, something that really caught me by surprise when I first started learning about attachment theory, I had a lot of head knowledge. So, what
Mhm.
I understood about attachment theory was very top level. And I could probably walk around and diagnose who had anxious attachment style, who had avoidant attachment style, who had secure attachment style, who had disorganized attachment style, who was fearful of void, all those things. And it was so interesting that the first time I was in a session with a heart centered counselor and I had diagnosed my husband. Okay. I could tell you back to front, you are an avoidant attachment style. These are the issues. These are the things you need to work with. And it was funny. The question that I was asked was, what do you believe your attachment style was? And hand on heart, with no like just guile whatsoever, I sat there and I said, oh, I've had a look into the attachment styles. I don't really identify with many of them. Maybe secure attachment. I think that's me. And just the look, bless her heart,
Oh.
on this counselor's face. Oh dear. Okay, I'm gonna have to be the one to tell you. And what I
Aw.
found so fascinating what I found so fascinating was the way that I had, and without support, it can be surprising to understand what anxious attachment style is and how it manifests. So, as I was speaking into what I thought anxious attachment style was, what I realized was that it was completely left of center. So, I thought anxious attachment style was presenting anxiety. Someone who maybe doesn't leave the house or who kind of chews at their fingernails and presents as someone who talks and looks and walks like they have anxiety. They don't look confident. And I just didn't identify as someone who was like that. But what I had become really adept at was masking, was the word that you used, and something we use on the podcast a lot is hypervigilance. And that meant
Yep.
being very good at problem solving and presenting as someone who was fine. The challenge was it was for me, what I hadn't realized was as an outsourcing tool. The more I was hyper aware and hyper managed everything outside of myself, the more I fooled myself into having a sense of control, which actually dissociated me from having any sense of inner peace and clarity and rest and down regulation whatsoever. So it was a really massive shift for me to understand that really I had very strong anxious attachment style. And I really needed to learn how to break that hypervigilance pattern and learn how to self-soothe as opposed to dissociate from my own needs and feel a sense of control by hyper navigating and being hyper aware of what was happening outside of me, which kind of sounds like a fixer. And it really fits with a lot of people who identify with the support that is found in Rise around, okay, how do I actually find rest? How do I find joy? And how do I get the support I need without having to feel like I'm on all the time and doing all the work? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal journey, why and how you discovered anxious attachment style, and what is the pattern, because we're all about patterns here on the Connection podcast. What is the pattern that tends to lead to someone developing an anxious attachment style at all?
Yes, so really the pattern starts in childhood. It can come from like very early relationships, but most of the time it's developed through your earliest attachments. If your caregiver or caregivers were emotionally unavailable or inconsistent, of course, then the child is becoming hyper vigilant and hyper attuned to their caregivers in order to feel safe. So, people who are anxiously attached, I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're about to disagree with me, but people who are anxiously attached want to blame people who are avoidant leaning. I like to say avoidant leaning, like more attached, like anxious leaning. So it takes away the shame and takes away that this is my identity when it's not. It's just
Mm,
something that
yeah.
describes patterns and behaviors. People who are anxious leaning will point the finger and be like, well, they are avoidant and that's why I'm feeling so anxious. And then that completely outsources our sense of safety, and it's easier to point the finger than to actually be like, what is within me that also has avoidant parts? What do I find
Mm,
attractive about this? And that was
mm,
100% me. For me, my patterns were like a complete fear of vulnerability. I was absolutely that girl, like you mentioned, that was saying, I'm fine. I'm totally good. And for me, what happened for 6 years, I developed chronic pain all over my body. I thought at this time in my life, I was going to be in a wheelchair because I was in so much pain. It started with chronic headaches, neck pain, IBS, adrenal fatigue. I had like cystic acne all over my face. And it was all ways that my trauma and anxiety were expressing itself because the body keeps the score. The body remembers everything that we have gone through. Because for me, both of my parents were extremely emotionally unavailable and neglectful. My dad was a narcissist, and then my mom was very inconsistent. And I also had an autistic brother. So I never fully got the attention that younger me needed. So then that really manifested for me becoming a fixer. Like you mentioned, I would date partners who were addicts, who couldn't meet my needs, who I ultimately didn't need to be vulnerable with because they had so much going on. And because that blueprint for me was emotionally unavailable parents, I attracted emotionally unavailable partners because our nervous system learns that it feels safest within the familiarity. And so a lot of my clients have told me the healthy guys give me the ick. I want to run away from them because they're used to that chaos and stress in their relationships. So that was a bit about my personal journey. And for me, it was like after I dated the fifth person that was straight up emotionally unavailable and avoidant and wasn't willing to look at their side of the street. I'm like, clearly there is a pattern within me. And I was just so heartbroken and done with feeling like I'm constantly unfulfilled. And it also started all with myself there in my relationship with
Yeah.
me.
And that's really hard. That's a really frightening moment in time for many people with anxious attachment style because
Mhm.
this deflection and outsourcing is a
Mhm.
self-soothing practice. How can I help
Yes.
you and fix you so that I can be safe? The
Yep.
consideration that maybe there are patterns, hidden patterns here that don't discount the love and care that you really do have for the people around you, these solutions and the support that you're trying to offer your avoidant partner or your emotionally unavailable partner or, the people around you, that it's not to discount that you are incredibly good at problem solving, incredibly good at
Mhm.
fixing, incredibly good at helping and supporting other people. But it can be very frightening to first have this realization, oh no, is there something that I am doing here that is contributing to this dynamic? Because this whole pattern is designed to build up a sense of worth by proving or showing that you can fix people. And what I wanted to touch on first of all, because what you mentioned there, your history and your childhood, your caregivers, there are so many people that are going to relate to really having a really tough early childhood. I also want to add in those people who perhaps have caregivers or have had a childhood that on the surface looks fine. Everything's fine. Not only is it fine, it is don't you can't talk about whether things aren't fine because you really threaten your own sense of safety and the sense of safety in your family. And I want to speak into those people because what I want to reaffirm is with so much of this work, it can feel very tempting to point the finger at the generation before us. And in many instances, that is absolutely called for. But there are also a huge subset of people who have great relationships with their parents and really work hard to maintain that sense of safety in those relationships. And I want to speak into them around that shame that sometimes people feel around, okay, well, I shouldn't have these attachment styles. I shouldn't feel this way. Everything should be
Mm.
fine. And I want
Mm.
to release that pause and like release that shame because even if you have the most perfect parenting relationships with your own parents and everything's wonderful, our own internal realities, what can happen is we can create these dynamics that help us to form our identity and obtain a sense of satisfaction, validation, and attention that may have been misdirected or missed. or may even be 100% true. And there's also different realities. So you can hold space and hold that duality of my reality and the patterns that formed me are real in my reality, and holding grace for that and space for that so that you can work through that without blaming, shaming, and throwing your relationship with your parents in the bin is absolutely something that is real, tangible, and possible. Don't feel like you have to abandon your connections with your primary caregivers in an internal sense in order to hold space for your own true reality. So I just wanted to pause there and like also bring into the conversation the people who, yes, may identify with having a wonderful child and everything's great, but still feel lost and ashamed. Why do I feel these patterns? Why am I here? And that's because we all have different realities. And on an unconscious level, the patterns that we build that help form our identity and help us survive in relationships can be all consuming on an unconscious level, because 95% of our patterns, behaviors, and relationships live in the unconscious mind. So we don't need to have that conscious validation at every second of every day when it comes to working on resetting what we need and what we want in our own relationships. So I just wanted to bring everyone along on that journey with us, because there's such nuance there.
Absolutely. There's a lot of nuance there. And I want to make this super clear because you're not consciously choosing emotionally unavailable partners as well.
Mm,
No one
mm,
wakes up and thinks, I want to be in an unfulfilled relationship. There are needs that are longing to be met, and our brain is looking to put an ending on our difficult childhood. And your childhood can be difficult in different ways. Like there are little t traumas and big traumas. Like what can be traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to another person. For example, this could even trigger an anxious attachment. Is your father bought your sister a balloon and not you? And you may have internalized, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. That is why he bought a balloon for my sister and not me.
mm.
And that's
Yeah,
just like really huge here. Yeah.
yeah. And I think I just want to offer our audience so much grace, because when it comes to what our attachment styles are, often in a lot of traditional models, what we can do is spend so much time hunting for a reason. What's a good
Yeah.
enough reason? What is a good enough reason for me to feel this way? And I just want to offer that grace that patterns, they come from self love and self protection. Okay. There would have been something that happened, and your unconscious mind made a decision. Okay, I'm going to start behaving in this way, or seeking support or seeking validation in this way in order to feel safe. And then that would have been justified the more that you got that validation. For example, the more you were able to support and help a caregiver when perhaps they should have been helping you, and you were celebrated for that. So even those micro moments that were completely unintentional by a caregiver on an emotional or a physical level, when it comes to, I love how you used big T and little t trauma. Trauma is not something that happens on a scale of, okay, the bigger the thing, the more okay it is for me to experience trauma. What often, I love this definition of trauma around the fact that two people can be in a car accident and it can be incredibly scary, incredibly dangerous. And one person is whipped off to the hospital, they have a broken leg, they have it set in a cast, they get dropped off back at home, they go to work the next day and they brush it off. Okay. That is something that is going to be far more traumatic than the person who was in the exact same car accident, who broke the exact same leg, went to the hospital, and then they had a kind nurse or a friend sit next to them and hold their hand and say, that was crazy. And that person is allowed to cry. They're allowed to really release that experience, really have their reality validated. And then it might be tough for the next week. They might have a lot of fear come up. They might have a lot of sadness. They might have a lot of anger. But for that next week, or even just for the next day, it's coming out. It's being processed. It's validated. You know, that the term is having an empathetic witness can be the difference between a pattern being established and sustained versus something that is tough in the moment. But then after that week, it's not haunting you or not affecting the way that you show up in a protective way.
Absolutely. It's all about what where's my nervous system capacity at? Meaning how much stress can my body handle? And a lot of that comes back to childhood experiences, right? Having that empathetic witness. So I completely agree here. And
Yeah.
attachment trauma can also look as a baby, you were left to cry it out, or you were separated from your mother between 0 to 6 months. Because between 0 to 6 months, a baby does not understand that they are a separate human being other than their mother. So that's
Mm.
another way that attachment trauma can be caused.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a ton of things that can contribute to it. And I think as long as you have the grace to explore what attachment styles mean to you, then hunting for the exact reason, not a problem. Also, if you have an anxious attachment style, you're not broken. Okay. This is a safe place. We're here to support you. And when it comes to having anxious attachment style, what I'm really curious about is, was there a point in time where you were first aware of experiencing anxious attachment style? What was there a moment in time that really stands out to you?
Yes, I would say for me, 2 moments stood out for me. One moment was I was with a covert narcissist, and I remember when my therapist told me after we broke up, "This is a trauma bond." And I was so, like, jaw dropped to the floor. I thought our relationship was, I wanna say good, but then as I was debriefing with my therapist, a lot of what was happening, like the hot and cold behavior, just the subtle manipulation tactics, the gaslighting, all of these things that were happening, I was just somewhat, like, not seeing it and, like, in denial because I was idealizing and projecting a fantasy version of him that I thought he was, and then once I actually brought what was actually happening to light with my therapist, she was like, "No, like, we need to reset these patterns. You are not going to be dating for 6 months. Like, 6 months, no dating apps, no flirting, and if you're listening to this and inside your body, you're screaming and you are like, 'Valerie, that just feels so uncomfortable to do,' that's just a huge sign that you struggle with codependency, as did I. And a lot of people struggle with it because they fear being alone. Because when you fear being alone, what's really going on is when you are actually alone, you are forced to sit with all of the discomfort, the dysregulation, the anxiety and trauma that you've carried in your body that has been suppressed. And so for me, that was like my biggest wake up call is I was like, I need to shift this pattern or else I'm going to essentially end up like my parents were very trauma bonded and they still are codependent and trauma bonded. And a really sticking, profound moment for me was when my parents got separated. And I remember my mom was very suicidal. She said that she wanted to die. And I was very frightened because my mom was always, for the most part, very happy, very positive, very bubbly, extroverted. So when I heard that, I was like, this is serious. And then, of course, when I became a therapist, I was like, this is classic trauma bond withdrawal symptoms. Like your brain is going through physical pain, is what it feels like in your body. So those were
Mhm.
two defining moments for me and how I realized I had an anxious attachment style. And it just felt like I was going to die. Like I remember when I broke up with my ex, with this person, and I remember we were living together and I left and I felt, oh my God, I want to die. This is so painful and awful. It just felt like my heart was ripped out of my chest and I didn't know how I was going to make it. That
Yeah.
sounds so extreme, but that's how it felt in my body, really.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of anxious attachment style people, that fear of abandonment is just such an overarching theme. Because I think for anxious attachment style people or anyone who feels stuck in that dance of do I stay or do I go, it's so important to understand what anxious attachment style is so that you're able to have clarity around, okay, am I going to be making this decision out of fear about whether to stay or go, or fear that I'm going to be alone, or even fear that I'm going to be seen, fear that I'm going to be judged, fear that I'm even going to
Mhm,
judge my own self, and that I'm going to
mhm,
uncover some patterns here that are going to be really uncomfortable. So
Mhm.
fear is such a driver around, and that particularly fear of abandonment. If
Mhm.
you're going to leave me, I'm going to leave first. Or if,
Yeah.
yeah, that can be a really strong hallmark of anxious attachment style people.
Yes, and I'll even give an example because I was dating someone after that, and we were long distance, and he visited me, and it felt like we had the most amazing week together. We told each other we loved each other, we were physically intimate. I was on such a high, and then he left to go back to his state. It felt in my brain like I was going through a breakup, even though we were still together. And it was like I was experiencing liverence. I was obsessed. All I wanted to do was hear from him. The only relief that I felt was getting a text from him. My emotional states were dependent on this man and his response. And that's what a lot of my clients say is I find that I'm giving way too much power to my partner or to my ex, and it's not something you're choosing. It's literally because an inner child part of you is mistaking them for your caregivers. And when that's happening, when someone has left, even if you're still together, and a lot of my clients experience separation anxiety from their partner if they like go on a business trip, it's triggering young parts of them that felt either emotionally or physically abandoned as a child. It's just reawakening what's already there. And
Hmm.
because, like, for me, my parents were extremely inconsistent. My mom would leave me in the middle of when I was crying to go take care of my dad or my brother. So it's no wonder why I had such a big reaction to him going home. And I was in complete shutdown and anxiety for days until I talk to him again. And that is just pure anxious attachment and codependency. And when you start to learn how to self soothe and heal those young parts of you, then that's when you can be more in your true adult self, AKA make decisions from logic, make decisions from what is in my highest good. Because unless you do that work, that healing of the inner child, you will never be able to make that decision from clarity because your fear of abandonment is going to cloud it. That's why we struggle with fantasy thinking, rumination, idealizing this person, overlooking the red flags. You can know all the red flags in the book, you can know every attachment style and the definition, but that's not going to mean shit when your inner child is freaking the fuck out inside because you don't know how to self soothe. And so when clients come into my programs and my signature ways of doing things, we always start with the nervous system because no matter if you are thinking of choosing to stay or go, if you're healing from a toxic relationship, we need to start by helping you feel safe in your body because you can tell yourself, I'm safe, I'm fine, I'm okay. But if your body is telling you something different, no amount of logic can override that.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say, do you have any emotional triggers that still surprise you
Mhm.
today that are related to anxious attachment style? And how do you hold space for them?
Yes, I'll just use an example today, an emotional trigger. So for me, I can have fear if I make a mistake. I was doing some work for someone, as I also do consultant work, and I do some marketing on the side. And I have had and held fear that the person that I'm doing work for is going to be upset with me and they're going to be mad at me because that was my dad's pattern. And so, even just today, for example, I did an entire braid spotting session around that. And I can share more about what that is, what that looks like. But ultimately, it came from young parts of me that were punished, shamed, ridiculed for making any type of developmental normal mistake. And so, of course, then as an adult, it would bring up fear if I would make a mistake. And so then, as I was in the somatic therapy session, I saw my grandmother and my great grandfather hugging me, saying, we still love you. You are still safe. We are still here for you. That completely started to rewire and reset my nervous system. I started to feel actually safe in my body. I started to actually feel relief. I started to be able to take deeper breaths, and I stopped like feeling so fearful about what was happening with this marketing client of mine.
Right.
And a
Yeah.
lot of clients struggle with that. It can just,
Yeah.
yeah, it just came up. And I'm grateful for that because it's a gift to be able to notice these patterns within myself so that I can also teach people how to do it as well and work through these patterns. And a lot of people will tell me when I'm doing the work, why can I still be anxious and triggered? It just means you're going deeper into the layer and your body is feeling safe enough to release these patterns that are unconsciously living in your body.
Yeah. What would you say is the hardest personal boundary that you've had to use in relationships?
Hardest personal boundary I've had to use in relationships. I would say this is like super vulnerable, but years ago, I would fawn like in the bedroom. And for me, it was really difficult for me to say no in the bedroom because I would want to be in that fawn response. I felt safe
Mm.
in the fawn response to please my partner because unconsciously I believe that if I'm pleasing them, if I'm doing all these things for them, then that means they're not going to leave me. And that is totally
Mm.
me. And it's an unconscious way that I was really just giving myself more trauma. But then it got to a point where my body was screaming for me and it gave me like reoccurring UTIs. And then once I actually started setting boundaries and healed that part of myself, that's when I was able to actually stop fawning in the bedroom and speak my needs and say no and feel safe to say no. Because I remember when a therapist of mine was like, you just have to say no. And I get that. Like logically, I knew that, but my body did not feel safe to
Mm.
be able to do that. And so that's why I will specifically share with clients ways on how to actually break that loop of people pleasing through the body. Because until the body feels safe saying no, you will keep saying yes, even when you want to say no, and you will not set boundaries.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think people who really identify with being very independent, being very good at problem solving, being very intelligent, very adaptable, they are the type of people who seem to navigate boundaries well outside of their intimate relationships. But in their intimate relationships, it's, I'm bending over backwards for you. I'm doing everything for you. And that can create a really high level of resentment, but also confusion around how can I not solve this? How are things looking so different at home? And I just don't feel supported. I don't feel loved. I don't feel cared for. And I can't seem to take the same skill set that helps me to do well and succeed outside of my intimate relationship into my home. So I'd love to hear from you around the things that surprised you about anxious attachment style. Were there the things after you learnt what anxious attachment style was that really took you off guard?
I think that's such a great question. I think two things come up for me. One, the one of the best pieces of advice that my therapist ever gave me was any big response or reaction that you're having is not coming from your true adult self. It's coming from a young inner child part of you. Please let that sink in. And then two, once I started to learn about anxious attachment, I learned about something called emotional impermanence. So essentially, that example looked like me freaking out, thinking like my partner was breaking up with me when he was leaving, but like we were fine, we were on great terms. My brain just did not understand that like he was still there. He still loved me even though he wasn't next to me. So if your partner isn't like constantly reassuring you or sharing those words of affirmation, and you start to feel anxious and like, what if my partner doesn't love me? Do you not like me? Do they hate me? That's like a lot of the inner dialogue of someone who's anxious leaning. But it's because people who are anxiously attached, like in their brain, the emotional, like their object permanence doesn't fully develop. That just ultimately means that you can't understand that even if someone isn't outwardly saying that to you, that they love you, that they actually still love you. So that was like
Yeah.
two big things that like really shook me to my core about anxious attachment.
And it's so surprising, I think, when you're new to this work, how overpowering these hidden patterns can be and how much of an
Mhm.
influence that they have over our lives, particularly if you are used to being a fixer and you do feel like you want to be in control and that
Yeah.
there's so much that you're good at controlling and you have such a concept of the things that aren't going right in your relationship. So this can be incredibly overwhelming. It can be challenging, and what I want to say to anyone who a lot of this information about anxious attachment style is new for is remember the greatest block to our growth and our healing and our ability to connect, the greatest block is actually something that might surprise you. The greatest block to having healing, having connection, and having the support we need in any relationships is actually shame. How could this
Mhm.
happen to me? What does this say about me? Why aren't I good enough? So I want to just pause and just give you a moment to rest in the fact that the internal dialogue that can come up sometimes when you are trying to explore new ways to have the support that you need in relationships around discovering new things about your own self and your own patterns that really can support you moving forward. That internal dialogue and sometimes this feeling of being taken by surprise or taken off guard, it's a completely normal and healthy, and it comes from a loving place inside. And also remember that the greatest block to having a reset and having a new way of receiving care and support in relationships, the greatest block is shame. So feel that, hear those thoughts, pause and honor that it can be overwhelming to discover new dynamics and new understandings about unconscious patterns. But don't stay there. There's so much on the other side. Allow that moment to be, there's a massive difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I recognize that something bad happened or maybe I made a mistake. Shame is I am bad. I am the mistake. One you can work with and one don't bother with it. It's a waste of your time. Feel it, experience it, and move on. But I would love to hear from you as well. When it comes to your own personal journey, what would you say is the most loving, expansive, supportive life lesson you would share with the audience around what you've learned and what you wish you could share with your own self before you started working with anxious attachment style?
What comes to my mind is we always think that we just need to heal our trauma, but we also need to have disconfirming experiences. We need to have experiences with others that show us, hey, we are safe now. We are loved because you can't just heal alone. You need to heal through relationships, especially if you have an anxious attachment style or you have CPTSD. That trauma didn't just happen from you sitting on the floor by yourself. It happened through relationships. So you also need disconfirming experiences. You need relationships that show you otherwise. It shows your body proof. We need that. And so we need to be able to self-soothe, and we also need to learn how to work with our protector parts that look at someone in an idealized way that overlooks red flags, our fear of abandonment, so that we can see people for who they are and then actually be discerning and be able to let people go that aren't right so that we can let in and see and feel safe with healthy partners, healthy friendships, and healthy dynamics.
Mm,
That's
mm,
when your whole life is going to shift 100%, 180. And the work that I do with my clients is after you regulate your nervous system and you learn how to self soothe, you now are no longer dependent on someone else to soothe you. In terms
mm,
of you are now repulsed by someone who's emotionally unavailable because now they're not familiar to you anymore. It's your
mhm,
nervous system is now picking up on those red flags. It's saying, "What the fuck is that?" So now we can shift it. Now our body is going to feel safe with healthy partners and it's going to feel repulsed by emotionally unavailable partners. And you don't have to read a 100-page checklist. You'll feel it in your body and you'll listen to it the first time and you'll
mm.
be able to listen to your intuition. This is
Yeah.
like the breaking work that I'm doing with my clients and with the world and with our podcast, and why I'm so grateful to be here sharing on this one and with you, Lauren, and for all the people listening who are actually doing the fucking work. Because when one person can shift their anxious attachment and self soothe, that's going to impact your children, their children, who you pick as a partner, who your children's parents are, how you are perceived in the workplace, how you
Mm,
relate to money, how you relate to your business. This all impacts every single area in your life. Health issues, like you mentioned at the beginning, like my health issues vanished. completely. I thought I was going to be in a wheelchair by now. I have zero chronic pain. It's insane what the body can do. So don't listen to anyone who says that you're going to have to constantly feel on edge forever and you're never going to get better and that you have all these scars and something's wrong with you. Like the brain is literally like we have neuroplasticity. Our brain is meant to change. So know that you are capable of change. It will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that as well, those unconscious patterns, when you are able to unlock them and you're able to identify unhealthy partners as well, there is a freedom that comes with, yes, being able to identify unhealthy partners, but also being able to use boundaries in a new way where you're able to gift other people the accountability and the ability to step up in a way that doesn't
Mhm.
continue, like with the anxious attachment style, dip into the chaos and the Groundhog Day debates and fights. You're able to give people the opportunity to step into their own power. Because I know that's something that happened in my own marriage. We were very anxiously avoidant, typical. But when you're able to break your own patterns, you're able to step into your own power in a new way. And for a lot of people, that may be this relationship isn't right for me anymore. And also, there are people absolutely where that new dynamic can become possible because you just stop joining in the dance. And that just
Yeah.
creates room for the other person to embrace healthy, loving, self-caring accountability, which is different. And that's new for people with anxious attachment style. So I want to thank you so much
Yes.
for coming here and sharing your wisdom and your personal life experience. And what I would love to do is ask you a question around if you had to ask my next guest speaker on my podcast a question, what would you ask them?
What are you dying to do that you haven't done yet? And what is stopping you from doing that thing that you say you want so desperately to do?
Oh, I love that. And so I would love to ask you that question.
Honestly, I feel like last year I would have said traveling, and now, like, these last few months, I've been traveling with my best friend, and I'm now, like, living that digital nomad lifestyle. Right now, I would say, honestly, like, resting a little bit more. I have been working a lot more. It's been a really big growth season for me currently. So, I would say resting and yeah, sometimes I can struggle with the pressure to be on because I also am so passionate about my work, and that's something that I continuously remind myself and work on is resting. So I would say those 2 things. Continuing to travel more, but I'm already doing that. And yeah, just giving myself more rest.
Thank you so much, Valerie. It's been such a joy and a privilege and a blessing to share
Oh.
this space with you. I'd like to finish up by just asking you, where can we find you? Where can my audience follow along post podcast and hang out with you in future?
Yes, thank you so very much, Lauren. It was so freaking awesome to be on this podcast today and dive deeper on anxious attachment. So people can find me on Instagram at Heal with Val, so HEAL with VAL, or you can listen to my podcast, the Anxiety Recovery Podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere you listen to your podcasts. So yeah, those would be the number 2 spots you can find me.
Beautiful. All right. I can't wait to share more of that space with you, Val. And thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me.
Big love.